All right, Shavosai, good morning. Let us begin by thanking the sponsors for this morning. Should to thank our TALMUD TORAH sponsors for the month of Kislev, Josh and Becca Friedman for dedicating all the shurim this month. Le'ilui Nishmas, Josh's father, Yisrael Yehuda Ben Chaim Refuah Zichron Libracha. To thank Semi and Malka Esterson for dedicating all the shurim this month in memory of their parents, Yitzchak Leib Ben haKohen, Sarah Rachel Bas Baruch Avraham, Hinda Bas Henoch Efraim, and in the of continued health and longevity for Mr. Morton Esterson, Admeh Ve'esrim Shanim Tovos. To thank the Pepper family for dedicating the shurim this month in commemoration of the yahrzeit of Yosef Pepper, Yosef Dovid Ben Yaakov. To thank our Week of Learning sponsors, Steve Goloskov, in honor of his daughter Rivi's upcoming wedding to Eli Bogart, and in honor of his father's upcoming first yahrzeit. And Hashem Shtav and Aliyah, Chassan and Kala should go to the Chuppah B'Sha'ah Tova U'Metzlachos. And our Week of Learning sponsors, the Pepper family, again, in the merit of a Refuah Shleima for Yaakov ben Racha. We thank all of our sponsors for their incredible generosity. I will say, with that, let us begin. We have a great daf ahead of us today. Today's daf is Lamed Hey, 35. 35. Okay, Chavran Zoom, you still hear me all right? Excellent. All right, and we are picking up in Meretz Hashem on the top of, right? Yeah, we got up to the top of Lamed Hey Amud Aleph. Esvei. Actually, we got further, but let's start from there again. Good. Let's start from there again. Top of Lamed Hey Amud Aleph 35a, first line. So if you remember again, we're dealing with a couple of very interesting questions, which are, right, so we're dealing with one question. Rav Chia bar Avin asked of Rabbah the following situation. If Ruvain says to Shimon, Kikari alecha, right, my kikar is prohibited to you. So remember again, and then what happens? Reuven gives that very loaf to Shimon as a matana. So what is the halacha? What is the halacha? Does the giving of a gift kind of take it away from the status of it's no longer kikari, it's no longer my loaf, right? If Reuven gifts the loaf, it's no longer my loaf, right? Or no, does it retain the identity of my loaf? So the Gemara seemed to say that giving it away as a gift does not take away its prohibited status. Not that it's prohibited status. The Gemara then threw in a couple of different questions, or a couple of different possible scenarios as well. Would theft remove status, or inviting? If Reuven were to invite Shimon over for a seudah and ask him and tell him, give him permission to partake of the kikar of the loaf, would that remove its status? Okay, but we're focused right now on gift, right? So once again, Reuven says to Shimon, "Kikari alecha, my kikar, my loaf is prohibited to you." And now what happens? Reuven gifts it to Shimon. So now we'll say what we've established is the giving of a gift does not remove the prohibited status from the loaf. Good. Esvei. So now the Gemara is going to raise the kasha. What's a little chazar from yesterday? So Esvei raise the kasha. Amar lo hish ilani parasa. So we'll say, so remember again, Reuven goes over to Shimon. I should say, well, we can keep it simple. I go over to Reuven. I say, Reuven, lend me your cow. Amarlo, so Reuven says, Konam para sha'ani kanui. Actually changes it over here. Sha'ani kai lecha, nechasi alecha, im yeshli para elazu. So Reuven says, this para that I have should be prohibited to you if I have any other para than this one. Okay. Hish ilani, sometimes people could just say no. Just say no, right? Hish ilani kardumecha. I go over to Reuven and say, Reuven, lend me your axe. Amarlo, he says to me, Konam kardum shiyeshli sha'ani kanui nechasi alai imishli kardum elazeh. He says to me, this axe should be prohibited to you if I have any other axe other than this one. Now I will say, the point that Ruv is trying to make is, I can't lend it to you because I only have one, right? I only have one cow, I only have one axe. Take a quick look at Rashi, actually, I will say. So look at Rashi. 3 lines down from the top, end of the third line. Osha Amarlo, here, just Rashi's translating the case. Nechasi asurin alecha, my property should be usher to you. Im yeshli para achares elazu, if I have another cow other than this one. Nimsa, so I will say, so that's the point. The point that Reuven's trying to make over here is, I only have one cow. V'haraya, everything should be usher to you, or my right, the par should be usher to you if I have another cow other than this one. He's making this statement because he's trying to show me that Allah Lamaisa, he only has one cow. Now what happened? Turns out, v'nimsa sheyeshlo. So I say, it turns out he's got another cow. It turns out that he's got another ox. So now the shaila is, what happens now with his property? So I'll say, so the Gemara says, very simple. Bechayav aser. So while Reuven is alive, now his cows and his axes will be usher to me. Will be usher to me. Take a look at the Ran for just a moment, 3 lines down from the top. Ran b'chayev usher im nimtza sheyesh lo para acheres or kardum acher. So if it turns out that Reuven really does have another cow or really does have another axe, ultimately again everything becomes prohibited to me. Okay, fine. They will say so. Now that's part 1. Part 2, mace. What happens now? Reuven dies. Oh, shenasnu lo b'matana. Or Reuven gifts me something, gifts me a cow, or gifts me an axe, then what's the halacha? Harei mutar. Ultimately, again, it's mutar. So both say, so let's go through both of these cases. So remember again, mace, so let's look at the Ran, again, both say it's the last wide line on the top. Mace, oshanas lo matana harehu mutar. Mishum dechi mace, oshanas lo matana, lo paraso, velo kardumo, velo nachas of hay. So both say, so remember again, what's the pshat? So remember, it turns out that Reuven has another cow or another axe. So therefore, again, his cows and his axes become asur to me. Now the Gemara says, okay, Reuven dies. So once Reuven dies, what's the halacha? Everything becomes permitted. Rabbi say, why does it become permitted? Why? It's no longer his. It's no longer his. But here's what's striking to us. If Reuven gifts any of this to me, it also becomes mutter. Right? It also becomes mutter. Now, both say, why is that? Again, the Ran explains, because when Reuven gifts it to me, it's no longer what? It's no longer his. Whoa. But that contradicts what we just said before. Because what did we say before? We said, again, this was the question that Rav Chia bar Avid asked of Rava. Reuven says, Kikari alecha. My kikar is asr to you. My kikar is asr to you. And now, Reuven gifts it to Shimon. We kind of established on Lamed Herbet Beis that the giving of a gift does not remove the kikari status from the loaf. So beforehand we said giving a gift does not remove the prohibition or does not remove the loaf from the ownership of Reuven. Here we're saying that giving a gift does remove ownership from the item. So what's the pshat? So we'll say this is actually incredible. That's not a kasha. Why? Listen to this. Shenitna lo al yedei acher. They will say in this case, where ultimately again, where the Brisa said that if Reuven gifts me an axe, it's mutter. Reuven is not gifting it to me directly. What is Reuven doing? Reuven is giving it to Shimon, and Shimon is giving it to me. Now, what's the mila of that case? The mila of that case is there is a change of ownership that happens independent of me. So in other words, the fact that axe was given from Reuven now to Shimon ultimately fundamentally removes it from Reuven's domain, so that by the time I get it, there's no vestige of Reuven's ownership upon that item. Take a look at the Ran again. Shenitna lo ayedei acher. Say in the short lines, in the thinner lines, about 5 lines in. Shenitna lo ayedei acher. So the Ran says, Shenasnu madir leinish ta'alma ba'achar kach nasnu zeh lemoder. So Reuven, the one who made the neder, gave the axe to Shimon, unrelated party, and then ultimately Shimon gives the axe to me. So I will say, so in that case, everyone will agree that halacha l'maisa, any vestige of ownership of Reuven who made the neder is no longer there. Now, I will say, contrast that with the case in Lamed Dalet Beis, because what was the case that we had before on 34b? What was the case? The case is where Reuven made the neder, kikari alecha, my kikar is asur to you, and then Reuven gifted that very kikar to Shimon. So when the person who made the neder is gifting it to the person who was the subject of the neder, the object remains prohibited. The object remains prohibited. It's this case, I will say, that works because here the object is being given to an unrelated party, so therefore the ownership evaporates like that, and then it's being given to the person who was the subject of the neder. That is going to be mutter. Incredible. So Amar Ashi, Dekanami Diktani, the rayit, so we'll say is Shenitnalo, Velo Katani, Shenosnalo. Wow, such a great deal. I will say, if you look at the lashon of the Bryce that we just read, what did it say? It used the lashon of mace, right? In the case we were just doing over here, mace. If Reuven died, right? If Reuven died, oh, shenitna lo b'matana. I will say, how do you translate shenitna lo? Shenitna lo means it was given to him. Now, it was given to him sounds like it's happening how? Through an unrelated third party. as opposed to the lashon of shenasnalo, is a much more directed act of giving, which would sound like an act of ruvain to me. Shenitnalo means it was given to me again, but from a secondary party. Incredible. So we'll say, so that's the end of that sugya. So how do we pass it? So we'll say, this actually is a really good case. So once again, let's go back to our original case. Reuven says to Shimon, Kikari alecha. Right? My kikar is asr to you. Now Reuven gifts the loaf to Shimon. So what's the halacha? So we'll say, here we go. The Rambam writes, Hilchos Nedarim, Perek Hey, Halacha Zayin. Here we go. Ha'omer lechavero, Kikari zu asura alecha. Reuven says to Shimon, my loaf, this loaf is asur to you. Afa pi shenasnu lo b'matana, harei zu asura alov. Rambam Paskins, even though Reuven gifts the loaf to Shimon, now both say, again, what's the Havamina? I would have thought that maybe when the loaf is gifted, it's no longer what? It's no longer kikari, it's no longer my loaf, it's no longer Reuven's loaf. Kamashma, no. Even once he gifts it, it still retains its isser. So even if Shimon gets that very loaf from Reuven, can't eat it. Now, watch this. Meis, if Reuven dies, v'nafla birusha, and let's say again, Shimon inherits Reuven. Oh, shenasna lo acher b'matana, or I will say what happens. Reuven gave the loaf to Levi, and Levi then gives it to Shimon. Harezi muteres. Ultimately, again, it's muter. It's muter. Why? Shalo amar lo ela kikari v'hari eina ato shalo. Because I will say it makes a lot of sense. In the case of death, I will say one of the most humbling things about death is there is no ownership in death. Right? No matter how much you've acquired. I remember years and years ago, there was a news story about a guy who was an avid car collector, and he left in his matzeva that he wanted his Mercedes to be cast in, I guess, like maybe concrete or stone, and that was his matzeva. Right? And people were saying, wow, like they were still like his love for cars so much. And you read it, you're like, pathetic, right? First of all, that's what you want to be remembered by your Mercedes. Mercedes is a nice car, right? But Lamaisa, like, but that's, but what you see deep down, what was it? Why does a person why does he want his car to be his matzeva? It is a futile effort to take it with you. Right? And it doesn't work. Somebody once told me, it was actually Bernie Kraft once told me a great line. He said, the hearse doesn't have a luggage rack. Right? Such a good line. He said, let's say, we spend our lives trying to acquire things, thinking that those things will make us happy. And at the end, or give us status, or make us chashuv. And it's nice to enjoy it's very nice to enjoy nice things. But Lamaisa, after 120, which goes by in a heartbeat, you take absolutely none of it with you. You take your box, you take your tachrichim, and that's what you take. Nothing else goes with you to the grave. An incredible yesod. All right, it just got very heavy. Okay. Good. So I'll say, so ultimately, again, it's too early to be so heavy. So the idea, so I'll say, the idea over here is when you die, right? So Reuven said, Kikari alecha. Right, so Reuven says to Shimon, my loaf is up. So guess what? Reuven, you die. Listen to the Musar. When you die, even the loaf of bread that was yours is not yours. Nothing is yours the moment you die. You relinquish ownership over everything. Incredible. Even your loaf of bread. So therefore, again, if he dies, the loaf is permitted. Or if it's given as a gift via a third party. In other words, Shabbos say, there has to be something essential. Essentially, what the Rambam is saying is like this. In order for Shimon to benefit from that loaf, ultimately, again, there must be a break in the loaf relationship between Reuven and Shimon. So anything that directly, so again, if Reuven dies, that's the break in the ownership. Right? Or if Reuven gives it to another party, and the party then gives it to Shimon, that's going to be permitted as well. Okay, that's how the Rambam has it. But let's go back there. So, Ba'amine Rava Merav Nachman. So this is a very interesting case. Yish me'ila b'konamos olo. So we'll say very interesting. So remember again, in all of our cases, in the last couple of cases, we've been using the kinui of konam. Right? Remember again, I will say an equivalent or a similar term of konam. Remember what is konam? What's konam? Carbon. So essentially what I'm saying is konam kikar zu alai or konam kikar zu alecha. This kikar should be konam. So I'll say, let's play this out for just a moment. Let's say the neder I make is konam kikar zu alai. This loaf of bread should be like a carbon to me. Shabbos said, the Gemara now is asking, Rava is asking for Nachman, how literal do we take that statement? Is the person literally making the loaf like a carbon? That will say, now if something is designated as a carbon, and you use it for your own mundane use, what's the halacha? What have you violated? Me'ila. Shabbos said, listen to this interesting shaila. If I make a neder that says, konam kikar zu alai, and I eat the loaf, perhaps the Gemara is suggesting I'm in violation of two prohibitions. Number one, lo yachal dvara, violated my neder. And maybe number two, what? Me'ila. Me'ila. In other words, maybe I've literally made this into a carbon to the point that if I benefit from it, it's actual me'ila as well. But I take a look at the Ran. This is great. The Ran is right across. Almost right across. Yesh me'ila bikonamos on the left hand side. Ha'oser davar alav bikonam v'ne'enam. If I answer something to myself via a konam, I say something is called konam, something is a carbon, and now I get benefit from it. Mi mechayev me'ila olo. Am I chayev me'ila or not? Ni'ar minan da, so carbon. V'chayev alav asham me'ila kinena min hakachem. So we'll say, what a good kasha. See here, we've always looked at the lashon of konam as just a kinui for the creation of a neder. Now the Gemara says maybe konam actually creates an actual carbonic situation to the point that if now I benefit from that loaf, I'm actually in violation of the laws of me'ilah. To which the Gemara says, Amar leiti nisua, we learn this. Makom shenotnu le'schar tipol hana lehektish. Now both say, remember again, let's go back to the Mishnah. So the Mishnah is talking about the things that even if I made a neder, prohibiting someone from deriving any benefit from me, certain things that I'm still allowed to do. Amongst those things I'm still allowed to do is what? Return their lost object to them. Right? So I make a neder, Reuven, you cannot get any benefits from me, and now Reuven loses an object, I could return the lost object to Reuven. But, I will say, but, the Mishnah said, if you normally pay a person a couple of shekel for doing such a thing like that, the money has to go to Hektish. So the Gemara says, wow, why does the money have to go to Hektish? And I will say, I just want to point out, Duran points this out, he says that there is a concept that sometimes in halacha, if you get money, you're not allowed to benefit from that money. So I will say, there's an expression that Chazal used. The expression is, Tipal hana liyam hamelach. Throw the money into the Dead Sea, which is another way of saying you can't get benefit. So why doesn't the Mishnah say that? Why does the Mishnah Dafka say that if you get money for Hashavas Haveda, for returning a lost object, what do you have to do with it? It goes to Hagdish. Why to Hagdish? So listen to this. So the Gemara says, so the Memra, ki Hagdish, Rabbi will say, because what it's saying is that ultimately again, this neder is the equivalent of Hagdish. Ma Hagdish yesh bo me'ilah, af konamas yesh bo me'ilah. Just like Rabbi will say, Hagdish is subject to me'ilah, so to a konam vow also creates me'ilah. So Rabbi will say, so in other words, the Mishnah is telling me in a veiled fashion, the fact that the Mishnah says, if I get money for the act of returning the stolen object, the lost object to Reuven. Now again, Reuven, I made a neder, I made a konam that he can't get benefit from me. So what do I have to do with the money? It goes to Hektish. Why? Because I'm under the penalty of a konam, or under the power of a konam. And we'll say what the Mishnah is telling me in a nuanced fashion is, a konam not only creates a neder situation, but what? Creates a me'ilah situation. Therefore, we'll say it would turn out that whenever you make a konam neder, if you go ahead and you violate it, you're in violation of two things. Number one, lo yachal dvara, profaning your word, violation of the neder. And number two, potential me'ilah, misuse or inappropriate use of sacred property. To which the Gemara says, in reality, kitanoi. This is a machlokes tanoim. In other words, whether or not a konam creates me'ilah. Here we go. Konam kikar zu hagdish. So let's listen to this. A person says, konam kikar zu hagdish. Right? So I'll say, a person says literally again, konam, this loaf should become like hagdish. V'achla beinua bein chavero. And once I eat the loaf, somebody eats the loaf. So I make the neder. And either I eat the loaf, my friend eats the loaf. What's the halacha? Ma'al. Wow. They've committed me'ilah. They've literally committed me'ilah. Lefichach yesh lapidyon. So we'll say, now by the way, now it works both ways. Anything that's subject to me'ilah that's consecrated also means what? It could be redeemed. So that's the good part also. In other words, it works. In other words, it creates a chumrah that now mamish it's like hektish, but it can also be redeemed. However, kikar zu alai. If a person says kikar zu alai la hektish, this loaf should be unto me for hektish, va'achla, and he eats it, humal. We'll say in that case because I've phrased the konam only as a prohibition to me, ultimately, again, only I've committed me'ilah, chaver lo ma'al. But my friend, if he eats the loaf, has not committed me'ilah, lefichach, ein lepidyon. Therefore, it has no redemption. Rabbi Meir. That's Rabbi Meir. Chacham say, ben kach lo ma'al, lefi she'ein me'ilah b'kona. So we'll say, now the Chacham come along and say, what are you talking about? This is a neder. This is not hegdish. And even if you use the lashon of konam does not create me'ilah. I should say, konam does not create hegdish. What does konam create? Neder. Which Rabbi say, again, just logical, the chachamim is, to be makdish something requires das. You're making a neder over here. Now again, could you have simultaneous das for both Nedarim and hegdish? Sure. But that would need to be a bit more explicit. In the absence of an explicit desire to make something consecrated, the lashon of konam was established by Chazal as a kinui, as an equivalent term to affect a neder, not to affect hektish. Therefore, the Chachamim say when you use lashon of konam, all you're doing is making a neder. You are not making something hektish, and therefore, again, there is no discussion about me'ilah in these cases. Amalei Ravacha Bereid Rav Avia Ravashi Kikari Alecha. So this is interesting. So what happens in the following case? What happens if halacha l'maisa again? What happens if halacha l'maisa? A person says kikari alecha, right? So again, this goes back to our previous case. I say to Ruvain, my kikar should be usher to you. Okay, konam, my kikar should be usher to you. Okay, v'nasna lo matana mimal. So ultimately, again. So now I go ahead and I give it to Reuven as a gift, right? And Reuven eats it. So has someone committed me'ilah? So the Gemara says, lim'ol no sin halo asira le. Says, listen to this. So if I go ahead, so who potentially committed me'ilah? If it's the no sin, if it's me giving the gift, ultimately again the loaf's not usher to me. Remember again, I said, what's the neder I'm making? The neder I'm making is this loaf should be usher, right? Ruven kikari konam kikari alecha, right? My loaf should be like a carbon to you. So Shabbos says. So now the Gemara asks, I give it now to Ruven as a gift, as someone committed me'ilah. So the Gemara says, well, who would be committing me'ilah over here? It's not me. Why? Why is it not me? The loaf's not usher to me, right? So it can't be me. Lim al mekavel, if it's Ruvain, Yachol da'amar, Hatera ba'isi, Yisra lo ba'isi. Ruvain can say, listen, I never had in mind to take receipt of anything that's prohibited or to enjoy anything that's prohibited, only something that's permitted. So it can't be me that it's usher. Amarle, mekabel ma'al l'chishiyotzi. So this is very interesting. No, the potential ultimately is for the mekabel. Right? Mekabel ma'al l'chishiyotzi. So we'll say the person who receives the gift, ultimately again, could go ahead and potentially commit me'ilah. But say if you take a look at the Ran says over here, mekabel ma'al l'chishiyotzi. Fine. Look at the Ran. Kolomar mehashta ein echad mehem moel mehanach tamid amart aval mia l'chishiyotzi ma'al nehi de gabe zichia arminan de zachi betosi l'chishiyotzi lo arminan hachi midi the havi aval akol motzi mos hektish l'chulin. So the Gemara says it could very well be that it's Reuven who receives it who could commit me'ilah when l'chishiyotzi, when he somehow transfers the loaf from ultimately Reuven's domain to his domain. Why? Shekala motzi mos hektish l'chulin kesavar shalchulin hu moel at moel af ze moel. Because I will say the way me'ilah works, interestingly enough, there's sometimes even a transference of an item from the domain of hektish to the domain of chulin could in and of itself affect a level of me'ilah. Okay, I will say so. Halach l'maaseh, the Gemara ends it off ultimately as a machlokes. We're going to see. We're not finished with this yet, even though we're going to a new Mishnah. We're going to see the Rambam in this in just a little bit. But I was trying to point out the Gemara is introducing something quite shocking. I'll tell you why. We've been dealing with konamos for a while already, right? It is fascinating, and we've always assumed that as much as konam means carbon, it doesn't really mean carbon. What does it mean? Neder. It's now quite shocking to begin to realize that the Gemara is entertaining the possibility that maybe konam actually means karban. And maybe ultimately, again, what the person is creating is that when I say konam kikar zu alai, I'm creating a dual isser. Number one of neder, number two of karban, to the point that if I, or for that matter, the subject of the vow, are in violation of the neder, there's in fact dual prohibitions. One of violation of a neder, and number two of me'ilah. So is there me'ilah by konamos? The takeaway is machlokes. Machlokes. Resolution in Miras Hashem, we'll see. We'll say Amud Beis. Great case. The Torah has Truma, so Masro, so Bladaito. So we'll say, listen to this. We are continuing in this same topic, which is, just to play this out. Reuven says to Shimon, for example, Konam she'en elecha. Right? Konam, I take a neder that I will not give you any benefit. That's the neder, right? So Reuven says, essentially to Shimon, you can't benefit from me. You see, remember, you can phrase it in two ways. Reuven says, I will not give you any benefit, or any benefit I give is usher to you. And Shimon, you cannot benefit from me. It's the same neder. Even if Reuven made this neder so that he's unable to provide hanoah to Shimon, the Mishnah is going on with a list of things that Reuven could still do. For example, Torah mes chumas masros daito. Reuven could go ahead and tithe Shimon's property with his knowledge. So he could take chumas and masros for Shimon with Shimon's knowledge, and that's not considered to be hanoah. What else could he do? Umakriv alav kinei zavin v'kinei zavos kinei yoldos v'chataos v'ashamos. Shabbos say this. Listen to this. Let's say in our example over here, right? So Reuven takes a neder. Konam hanoasi alecha. Any hana, Reuven says, any hana that I could give you is usher like a carbon onto you, Shimon. So therefore, Shimon cannot get any hana from Reuven, right? So now the Mishnah says, okay, while that's true, there are still certain things that Reuven could still do for Shimon, like we saw in the previous Mishnah, right? He could go out and pay his half shekel. He could return his lost object. He could pay off his debts. So now continuing in that, Reuven could go ahead and separate out Shimon's shumas and ma'aser. So we'll say, watch this. Let's say Reuven's a kohen. Right? And Reuven made this neder that ultimately Shimon can't get any benefits from him. Okay? Now watch this. Shimon shows up in the Beis HaMikdash, and Shimon has karbanos he has to offer. Reuven is the kohen on call. Right? So the Mishnah says Reuven could offer up Shimon's karbanos. He could offer. Now, what we're going to see, what's intriguing, I will say, if you look at Rashi says at the end of the first line, "Umakriv alav im haya kohen oso shenadar shelo yena mimenu." So we'll say again, if Reuven's a kohen, Reuven's the one who made the neder that Shimon can't get any benefit from him. Yochol lahakriv alav kinei zavin v'kinei zavos. Ultimately, I will say now, it's interesting that the Mishnah phrases this as Reuven could offer up Shimon's bird pairs. Kinei zavin, kinei zavos. Shabbos said the bird pair is often up for zivos, or kinei yoldos, the bird pair is offered up for a yolda, this woman who gives birth, chatos and ashamos, and sin offerings. What else can Reuven do for Shimon? Umalamdo, medrash halochas va'agados. Again, ultimately, if Reuven is a Talmid Chacham, Reuven could teach Shimon medrash, halacha, agada, avalo yilamdenu mikra. What can't Reuven teach Shimon? Chumash. Okay, why that distinction of the seen in Gemara? Aval Malamidu has banav vesbenosav mikra, but Reuven can teach Shimon's children everything, including Chumash. Okay, so therefore I will say again, just to be clear on what the topic of the Mishnah is, same case as before. Reuven has taken a neder prohibiting Shimon from getting any level of benefit from him. The Mishnah is continuing in the list of things where even if there's a neder, things that Reuven is still permitted to do for Shimon. So essentially we have three categories, right? Category one is Trumas HaMaisros. Reuven could separate out Shimon's Trumas HaMaisros with Shimon's knowledge and consent. Number two, if Reuven's a Kohen, Reuven could offer up Shimon's karbanos. And number three, Reuven could teach Shimon Torah with the interesting exclusion of Chumash. But yet, to Shimon's children, Reuven could teach everything. Okay, let's analyze. We'll say, so now this is incredible. Says the Gemara. We'll say, this is great. Ibailahu, Hani kohani shluchei didan havu, o shluchei dishmaya. So I'll say, listen to this. Such a yesodistic question. They will say, who do the Kohanim work for? Who do the Kohanim work for? Or better stated, who do the Kohanim represent? When the Kohanim are in the Beis HaMikdash, who do they represent? Are they the representatives of Klal Yisrael, Shluchei Didan? The Kohen will say, again, really, what happens is every Jew should be able to do the Avod in the Beis HaMikdash, but HaKadosh Baruch Hu says that's not feasible. So therefore, again, the Kohen is my Shaliach. I have to offer up Karbanos. I can't do it myself. The Kohen is the extension of me. He's my Shaliach. Or maybe not. Maybe the Kohen is ultimately, again, a representative of HaKadosh Baruch Hu to Klal Yisrael. So we'll see here the Shaila, does the Kohen represent us, Klal Yisrael, to Hashem, or does the Kohen represent Hashem to us? What a machlokes. What a machlokes. So the Gemara says, listen to this, Lamai nafkamina, what does it matter? Oh, it matters a lot. Lemudar hana. Well, I'll tell you why it matters. Here I go, I'll say, it matters in terms of what happens, like in a case like we were just describing. I go over to my local Kohen, and I say to the Kohen, I make a neder not to get any benefit from you, Kohen. Hey, so I say, now watch this. If you say that the Kohen is the representative of Klal Yisrael, so the Gemara says, Hamahani leiva asar. So I'll say, if he's my shaliach, and I made a neder not to get benefits from him, guess what? I can't benefit from him. In other words, I can't have him offer up my karbanos. Conversely, but if we look at the Kohen as the representative of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, then what? Even if I made a neder not to get benefit from him, I can still have him offer up my karbanos. Why? That's not called getting benefit. That's not called a personal benefit. Because when the Kohen offers up the karbanos, we'll say, who is you offering it up on behalf of? HaKadosh Baruch Hu. He's not my shaliach. He's the Ribono Shel Olam shaliach. I will say incredible. So what's the halacha? Who do the Kohanim work for? So we'll say that's not as we can actually answer this from our Mishnah, which is quite interesting. So Tashma, this is now we learned Makriv Alav Kinei Zavin. So let's remember again, what did the Mishnah say? So we'll say this is the Mishnah's case, right? Reuven makes a neder to Shimon, saying, Shimon, you cannot get any benefit from me. And I will say in the case of the Mishnah, Reuven is a Kohen. Shimon shows up with his karbanos. What did the Mishnah say? Reuven could offer them up. So what do you see from here? I amrit shluchei didan kamahani lei. So we'll say again. So obviously, if you hold that the Kohen is the shaliach of the Jew of Klal Yisrael of Yisraelim, then ultimately, how could the Kohen offer up? How could Reuven offer up Shimon's karbanos? He's giving Shimon hana. The Gemara says. So by the fact that it says that Reuven could offer up Shimon's karbanos, so we'll say, what does that show you? That the Kohanim are not the shliach of Klal Yisrael. The Kohanim are the shliach of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That's why the Kohen, even though again he's made a neder, Reuven's made a neder not to give any benefit to Shimon, Reuven could still offer up the karbanos. The Gemara says, okay, let me ask you this question. Listening makriv alav karbanos. I will say, the Gemara says, can I ask you, why does the Mishnah give such specificity? I will say, the Mishnah says, Reuven, who made a neder not to give any benefit to Shimon, if Reuven's a Kohen, he could offer up Shimon's bird pairs for zivos, for childbirth, chatos, and ashamos. I will say, if you just simplify the Mishnah, how do you simplify the Mishnah? Let it say, right, Reuven could offer up what? Karbanos. Why Dafka mention these specific types of karbanos? To which the Gemara listen to this. Ella mechusare kapara shayni. So I will say, this is very interesting. The common denominator amongst the karbanos mentioned in the Mishnah is that they provide atonement. There are different types of karbanos. There are some karbanos that ultimately, again, can be voluntary offerings, certain karbanos, right? And there are other karbanos that are necessary in order to effect atonement. If you look at the karbanos in the Mishnah, these are all atonement offerings, right? The bird pairs for zivos, person's a zav or a zava, so their purification process is not complete up until the bird pairs. Ultimately, again, yoledes, same thing, and a chatas and an asham, a person has transgressed. So these are all situations of mechusari kapara, and the Gemara says mechusari kapara are different. Now, how are they different? We'll say go right across to the Ran. Very exciting. Right to the right hand side to the Ran. Ella mechusari kapara shining. Kolomar v'adarabba tifshot leidach gisa bechev matatana mechusari kapara belachod dein tzrichen das. So I should read one more line. I'm sorry. Back to the Gemara. Don't Rabbi Yochanan. We'll say what's different before we go to the Ran. What's different about mechusari kapara? The Rabbi Yochanan, hakol tzrichin das chutz in mechusari kapara. Rabbi say, watch this. In general, when you bring a carbon, carbon requires das, right? Intent. I have to intentionally bring. Rabbi say, there's an exception. What's the exception? When I have outstanding karbanos that are necessary in order to affect kapara, those karbanos can be brought on my behalf, even without my knowledge. Which Rabbi say is incredible. So just to play this out, let's say I become a zav, and I happen to be sharing this with my friend. Been a difficult week. I've been a zav, right? It's a close friend. Right? So ultimately again, and now I tell him, again, market's not so good. I have to bring my bird pairs and everything like that. He decides to bring my karbanos on my behalf without my knowledge. It works. And Rabbi say that is a unique halacha. But let me contrast that. I'll contrast that. Rabbi says, let's say I come back from a sea voyage, right? The voyage across the sea. So what's the halacha? What do I have to bring? Carbon toda. If someone brings my toda on my behalf without my knowledge, it doesn't work. It's fascinating. It's dafka din by mechusare kapara. Only by atonement offerings, someone could bring it on my behalf without my knowledge. The examples in the Mishnah are all kapara karbanos. Now look at Iran. Mechusar kapara shani is so interesting. Kilomar, I can say just the opposite. Tifshot leidach gisa. Dechevan detana mechusari kapara belachod. So Rabbi say the Mishnah is only talking about karbanos which affect atonement. De'in tzrichin das. These karbanos in general do not require the intent of the owner. So the Gemara says, Mashma dafka hani bishum dechevan de'in tzrichin das vaday koin lav shlichusan ka'avid. Rabbi say this is so fascinating. Remember, let's take a step back for just a moment, right? Let's just trace back our steps. Remember, we'll say, what's the case in our Mishnah? What's our case? What does Reuven say to Shimon? Reuven says to Shimon, can't get hana from me. I hereby take an enter, you cannot get hana from me. What does the Mishnah? So we'll say, so now, what happens? Reuven is a Kohen. Shimon rolls into the Beis HaMikdash. He has kavanos that have to be offered. What does the Mishnah say? He can offer it. Now, the Gemara says, by the way, this helps us to solve another very intriguing question, which is, who do Kohanim represent in the Beis HaMikdash? Are they the shluchim of Klal Yisrael or the shluchim of Hashem? It's clear from the Mishnah that they must be the shluchim of who? HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Because if the Kohen was my shaliach, he wouldn't be able to offer up the karbanos. Says the Gemara, hold up. Maybe not. Because if you look at the examples of the Mishnah is only bringing down certain types of karbanos. What type of karbanos? Kapara karbanos. What's unique about karbanos offered up to affect kapara? They can even be offered up without what? Without the intent or knowledge of the owner. So Rabbi said, listen to this. Maybe in that kind of case, where the Kohen, the Ran suggests, the Gemara is suggesting, in that kind of case, where the Kohen is offering a carbon that doesn't even need the intent of the owner, everyone would agree that the Kohen in that capacity is not acting as my shaliach, but rather as whose shaliach? As HaKadosh Baruch Hu shaliach. And maybe that's why in this case, the Kohen is able to offer up the carbon. Back to the round. Vadei Kohen lav shlichusan ka'avid. Aval b'shar karbanos hatzrichin das shluchei didan minhu di'ilo listening. We're saying, hear what the This is incredible. Maybe what the Mishnah is saying is like this. In a case of a carbon that affects kapara, that's where Reuven the Kohen could go ahead and offer it up on behalf of Shimon, even though Reuven has an outstanding neder that says Shimon can't get benefit from him. Why? Because in the case of a carbon that comes to affect kapara, that could be offered up even without Shimon's knowledge, even without his intent. So therefore, when Reuven the Kohen offers that up, he's not acting in the capacity of Shimon's shaliach, rather he's the shliach of Hashem. But perhaps by other karbanos, which absolutely do require the knowledge of the owner, or the intent of the owner, maybe in that case, Reuven could not offer them up on behalf of Shimon, because Reuven would be acting as Shimon's shaliach. Such an incredible chakira, I will say. So the Gemara says, The Damar, let's read it again. Damar Yochanan, Hakol Tzrich Das, kind of explain the whole Gemara, but now let's go through the Gemara. Damar Yochanan, Hakol Tzrich Das, in general, karbanos require intent of the owner, Chutz Muchasai Kapara, with the exception of, say, ultimately again, of karbanos brought to effect kapara. How do we know? This is very interesting. Shahare Adam may be karban albanav ubnos of ktanim. Because we'll say a person has the ability, listen to this, to bring a karban on behalf of his children. Shne'emar, Zos Toras Hazov Ben Gadol Uben Katan. So we'll say the idea over here is, I have the ability to offer up a karban on behalf of my children. That will say again, the complexities of a child becoming a zav, we're not getting into right now. The point over here is, I can bring karbanos on behalf of my children. That will say, now why is that interesting? Because the pashtus, the child may or may not have das, but what you see from here is that karbanos brought to effect kapara do not require das. So so again, just full circle, because we're going to go on a little bit of a tangent for just a moment. Maybe what's happening in Mishnah is like this. The Mishnah is very specific with the types of karbanos that Reuven the Kohen, who made the neder, is able to offer up on behalf of Shimon, the subject of the neder. And they're dafka karbanos which affect kapara. So maybe it's only those kind of karbanos that Reuven could offer up on behalf of Shimon. Why? Because those type of karbanos do not require das, and because they don't require das, therefore Reuven the Kohen is certainly not acting in a shlichus capacity for Shimon. But maybe other karbanos which do require das, Reuven would not be permitted to go ahead and bring for Shimon. The Gemara says, by the way, Elamiata of Rabbi Yochanan. I will say, Rabbi Yochanan darshan zos toras hazav. That general statement means that ultimately, again, whether for an adult, whether for a child, you can bring the karban on behalf of the children as well. So is that true? When the pasuk gives a general statement, it comes to include children. So when it says this is the halacha for the yoledes, zos ben ketana ben ketola is coming to include a minor and an adult. The Gemara says that can't be. Ketana bas leidahi is a younger leketana capable of giving birth. Vaha tani rabbibi kameid Rav Nachman. And we'll say back to our Ksuvas days. Shalosh nashim misham shos b'moch. There are 3 women who are allowed to use birth control. I would say moch literally again is an absorbent cloth. That was a barrier method for birth control. 3 women who are able to use the moch. Who are they? Kitana, a minor, Mi'ubar, someone who's pregnant, Umeinika, and ultimately a nursing woman. They both say Kitana, Shemetis Abe Batomas. They both say Kitana maybe could become pregnant. The problem is she's going to die as a result of that pregnancy. So we'll say, so therefore again, you can't darshan it to include Kitanim. Hahi, Zos Toras Hayoledes Ben Pikachas Ben Shota. Now we'll say, that general phrase, Zos Toras Hayoledes, comes to include that a man could bring a karban yoledes on behalf of his wife, whether his wife is a pikachas Shabbosai means mentally aware, or a shota, or insane. The Gemara says, Kedid Rabbi Yehuda. The Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Adam maybe karban ashra ishto. I will say, ultimately, again, a man could bring a karban ashra. I will say, this is a case where, let's say, a man is wealthy, he marries a woman, she was sane at the time they got married. Then what happens? She becomes a shota. Shabbos, I remember again, karban yoledes is one of those karbanos that's offered up that's reflective of your financial station in life. So if the husband is an ashir, even if his wife is a shota, he still has to bring the higher level karban on her behalf. The char karban shechayeves, and I will say ultimately a husband can bring on his wife's behalf any karbanos that she is chayev. Shekach kosevla, because after all this is written into the ksuva, v'achrayes de islay lech alay min kadamatz dina. I will say, by the way, just as an interesting aside, one of the obligations as spelled out in the ksuva is a husband that has an obligation to pay for all of his wife's karbanos. So if she goes on a carbon spree, right, so lemaisa, again, the husband has holding the bill. So we'll say, so again, that was a little bit of a tangent. So we're going to stop over here today, but I just want to point out we have 2 outstanding questions. What are our 2 outstanding questions? Well, it's really one. In other words, we'll say, so really what we're asking is, they're fundamentally so by Kohanim. Who do Kohanim represent? Are Kohanim the Shaliach of Klal Yisrael, or are they Kohanim, or the Shaliach ultimately of HaKadosh Baruch Hu? Now I will say, the reason that bridges into our Mishnah is halacha lemaisa, what happens when there is a situation when ultimately, again, Reuven takes a neder prohibiting Shimon from getting hana from him, and now Reuven is a Kohen. Does Reuven have the ability to offer up karbanos on behalf of Shimon or not? that resides in this question, and then to try to figure out why the Mishnah Dafka chooses the Kabbanos it mentioned, to be continued, and resolution, including, again, I will say from the previous Sugya, B'yaz Hashem tomorrow, Shkoyach. All right, have a great day, everyone. Good to see everyone. David and Jai from Eretz Yisrael, incredible. Thank you.